welcome, folks. Welcome to today's webinar on school board elections and making sure that we cover them correctly in the way that's best serving our communities. We're joined today and our co-presenters here, John Mooney and Hannah Gross of NJ Spotlight News. Thanks to Manya Pashman for putting this together and helping us wrangle this. I'm Joe Amditas from the Center for Cooperative Media at Montclair State University. And together with NJ Spotlight, the center has put together a voting guide starter kit for school board elections, which many of you are aware of. We've got all kinds of resources, templates, and excellent information that you can use to make sure that your community and your school districts are informed about the candidates that are vying for that electoral position. So with that, I'll hand it over to John. You want to say a few words and kick us off, and then we can move into the meat.
Yeah, thanks, Joe, and thanks everybody for joining us. Looking forward to sharing some ideas, some strategies for covering these school board elections. Certainly a pretty pivotal year. I've been saying that for a few years now, but this is certainly with the presidential race at the top of the ballot and school boards becoming a lot more, let's just say, animated of late. This is a big election for your communities and your school districts, and we're happy to share what we know. Myself, I'm a longtime education writer before Spotlight at the Star Ledger and the Bergen Record, and Hannah comes to Spotlight now as our education writer and child welfare writer. And we're going to go through some things. The presentation won't be terribly long, but we're going to sort of go over. We're going to start with a bit of a primer on what the school board does and what it means. Most of you probably know that pretty well, but certainly there's some things that the school board doesn't do that are worth reminding. Then we'll go through a few issues that are quite big nationally and in the state and playing out in the local school boards, and we'll give you our sense of where those things are headed and maybe some approaches. And then we have a few tips, ideas, but we'd also like to hear from you about some of the things that you'd like us to share. Certainly, if you're with us live, you can do so through the chat or just wave your hand. And if you're watching this as a video, we're posting our email addresses at the end of the presentation, and we are more than happy to answer any of your questions. And there will also be some resources that we're sharing that give town by town, district by district data on everything from school finance to test scores. Those are also available for free, and we're happy to share it if you have any questions about that. And throughout, we certainly, any kind of feedback and conversation is great. So let's get us going. Hannah has a fancy little PowerPoint that she's going to share, and take it away, Hannah.
Yeah, thank you guys for coming. So like John said, you guys know what the school board does, but maybe not every reader does. They might not understand exactly what powers they have, so it could be helpful to make sure that gets up in every story. They serve as a link between the community and the school system. They're setting policies and goals for the district. One of the biggest responsibilities is approving the school budget. They have a big say over how taxpayer money gets spent, which makes them really important, not just for kids and parents and teachers, but also for everyone who lives in a community. They probably want to have a say in this election because it does impact them. The school board also approves the curriculum, and that's up to them, but they must choose a curriculum that aligns with state standards. So there's flexibility within reason. They also, one of their biggest charges is hiring and evaluating the superintendent. There's been a lot of turnover in school administrative positions this last year. So there are a lot of districts going through superintendent searches right now, which is a big task for the school board and definitely something to ask about and write about if your district is one of those that's looking for a new person to take over the top position. And one thing the board does not do is they're not managing day-to-day operations. That's really up to the superintendent, the principal, people who are in the actual school buildings and work for the district that are not the volunteer board members. And if you don't know who is running in your district, the best place to get that information is the county clerk's office. Most of the counties have that information posted online, but sometimes you might have to call or email. In Atlantic County and a few others, it's not available already.
Yeah, a couple of things on that is they will also, and Hannah, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but if they are part of a slate of candidates, they will be listed as such and with a fancy little moniker of sorts. So it's worth knowing that that is a relatively new thing to New Jersey school elections, where you can run as slates. It doesn't get down to being Democrat or Republican, but certainly the slates do have an agenda of sorts that they're pressing, whether it's something to do with keeping taxes down or any number of issues, and there are plenty of them these days. And then the other thing I wanted to add is that last line that the board does not manage day-to-day operations, and that's important to note because you're going to be dealing with candidates who probably think they do. And they, actually by law, they don't. That is left to the administration. They are really meant to set policy and goals for the district, but not to get into the weeds in a given building or even really being going into buildings. And there are some districts in their contracts that preclude them from going in. So, don't let a candidate tell you that they can go in and make everything perfect. Their role is to really set the policies and the goals of a given district. So these are important. Not all candidates necessarily recognize the full role, and so it certainly is important for you to share that with your readers of what the role is. You want to go into some issues, Hannah, that are playing out nationally and in the state?
Yeah, the top three issues. Sorry, Kimmy, do you want to jump in with the question?
Oh, thanks. Yeah. So, I can you speak to the issue of do boards that are being elected in November elections, do they get to approve budgets, or is that reserved for boards that are elected in April elections and they lose that power once they switch to a November election format?
Yeah, Kimmy raises a good point. We've changed how we elect school boards a few years back under Governor Christie. They used to, as we all know, were in April with the budget also being voted upon. If you chose to, and it was a choice, if a district chose to move to November, just the school boards are on the ballot at that point. The budget has been approved, and that is done by the school board in the spring. Um, so yes, that board that you're electing in November is going to be acting on the budget, but next spring's. The one for this school year has already been approved, was approved back in April or May, somewhat fluxed with state aid. So yes, they have that role, but now the budget, if we're in November now, that budget is no longer on the ballot. That has already been approved. There are some stipulations if you go above a certain cap, that you have to put those expenses on the ballot, and in a few districts you'll see that in November. But by and large, the budget is set. What you're electing is the people who are going to set that budget next year.
Okay, great.
If that makes
Thank you so
sense.
much. Yep. Yeah, okay. It's a little bit different than I thought, but thank you for that.
Yeah, and feel free to reach out, Kimmy, and I'm happy to go further into it if you wish.
Okay, John, thanks.
And so obviously school budgets, state aid, that's one of the top issues John and I have seen in our coverage, and we're expecting that to be a big issue as budgets are one of the primary responsibilities of school boards. Two of the other things we want to highlight are instruction and teachers and personnel, which we'll go into. So school board has a role in approving the budget, and that happens each year in the spring based on, first they find out how much money they're getting from the state, and then they have to approve the budget given that. So right now there's a lot of controversy over state aid and which schools are getting the most money, which schools are getting the least money, and it's possible there's going to be changes to the school funding formula within the next couple of years when these board members will be serving. So it's something to keep an eye on what their budget priorities are, how they would respond to changes in state aid, and what they want to prioritize for the students. They'll also have a role over things like courtesy busing, other new initiatives that might require additional funding from, say, a bond referendum. So it's important to pay attention to those things.
Yeah, and as Hannah said, this is all going to be changing probably sooner than later, but I don't see it in the next year. With a governor's election coming up, they're probably not going to get into trying to fix something that is so significant in the meantime. But certainly by 2026 and 27, there will be some movement afoot to alter the funding formula that's now used. Be aware, state aid, and Hannah posted there. We have several stories that outline what every district gets in terms of state aid, and so feel free to certainly use that and use that data and those numbers in your reporting. There are most of districts are getting more aid than they used to. That by nature of the formula, but there's 100 or so districts that are getting less. And that has caused, quite a stir among, it's actually more than 100, it's maybe close to 200, caused quite a stir in a lot of districts, and you're going to hear that come up among candidates talking about it. Much of the budget is set by, is really, the process, at least in my experience, has been that really the superintendent and the business administrator are the key players on at least setting the opening draft of that budget. And they will make that presentation then to the school board, which then goes into its own deliberations and a fair amount, I'm sure, behind closed doors discussions on how that money is going to be spent. 2/3 of it is going to be around personnel, if not more, teacher salaries and benefits, pensions. So a fair amount of it is covered. But when times are tight, there's also the opportunity to cut staff, or when times are flush, to add staff. So that is where the school board is going to be playing certainly a role. And it is arguably the biggest decision that they have of the year, and it comes in the spring. And I'm sure there's going to be some opinions among candidates about whether the money is being well spent or not. State aid is anywhere from a fraction, small fraction, single digit fraction of a district's budget, if they're a relatively well-to-do one, to being 80-90% of a district's budget if they don't have necessarily the means to tax their own. So there's a lot of nuance to that, and we certainly can help you walk through that in your home district. But certainly click on those links and you'll find a lot of information, probably more than you'll ever need.
And budget documents for each district should be posted on their school website, normally on the Board of Education page. You should be able to find either the budget documents as standalones, or you could look back through their spring meetings and see the budget presentations if you want to dig deeper into that information.
Yeah, by law, they have to post it, and they post it in a fairly prominent place. They're called user-friendly budgets. And if they're not, then that's a question you should be asking as well. But those are definitely should be online for every district out there. And it's going to be just districts. You don't usually see them broken down by school. Some places do that, but typically it's going to be a district-wide data set.
And another big issue for school board members is instruction. So board members are tasked with approving curriculum for the school district, which would be in specific subject matters, and that has to align with state standards, which board members do not have any control over. For example, kids have to have certain skills by a certain grade level, and then they get to approve a curriculum that's recommended by leadership in the district. Some of the big things we're watching, especially coming out of the pandemic, are learning loss and how kids are making up for ground they might have lost when they were learning remotely, and also how they're becoming better at socializing and improving on some of those skills, social emotional learning, that were lost during the pandemic. Another big thing coming out of the pandemic, even though it's been an issue for longer, is literacy and the importance of kids learning how to read when they're in those early elementary school grades, so they can use those skills later in school and in life. And there's a big push coming down from the state on that. There's new standards with updated literacy goals, and there's also legislation that's going to include bringing screeners into schools, which are testing students for reading deficiencies in grades kindergarten through 3rd to catch any issues with reading early on. So it'll be up to the boards to help determine and approve which screening service is going to be used, how much that might cost a district. And there is money coming from the state on that. Also, in terms of instruction, there have been some culture war issues playing out in school board races, particularly when it comes to sex education in schools, access to books, and the rights of LGBTQ plus students. The school boards have to comply with state law on all of these issues. There's anti-discrimination law in the state. So even if a school board candidate might make some promises, they're always bound to comply with state law, for example, protecting the rights of LGBTQ plus students. So whenever I'm reporting on that, I like to include that these students do have rights under state law, no matter what a school board decides, which is important context. There's also some district specific issues to pay attention to. Maybe your district is one that's undergoing a regionalization feasibility study, which would look at combining a few school districts in the area to save money and create some cost saving efficiencies. Maybe your school district is revisiting cell phone policies, considering having students put their phones in like a magnetic locking pouch during the day. Maybe you're considering changes to school security. So those are all things to pay attention to, ask candidates about, and look through in past board minutes if these are issues that have been coming up in your area.
Yeah, this is, Hannah, this is, to say the least, this is where the drama comes in. All these issues are, even curriculum. I mean, curriculum is fairly in the weeds in terms of, is literally how you're teaching to those standards in every grade level. And typically, and boards all have their own schedules, but typically a board is not doing all the curriculum at once. It is quite a process. It involves committees and lots of consultation. They'll typically do one or two of their subject areas, language arts and math, science, and they'll sort of rotate them through. The state is also approving those standards on somewhat of a rotation. So it does align with that. I think English or language arts just went through or is about to go through. But social studies often is a big one that brings up some of these issues. And it really, much more so than ever before has that become a big issue on school boards on how you're teaching. In the 70s, there was a bit of an uproar around sex ed. New Jersey was one of the first to really include that in their standards and ultimately their curriculum. That was a big fight. But other than that, I mean, it really was the last few years when you've seen some of these issues come up, and a lot of them around LGBTQ issues and again, sex education. So look for that. There are going to be candidates who are running on that specifically. There are going to be slates that are running on that specifically, and certainly that those are the things that also, because of the emotion involved in it, they bring out voters as well. Joe, you had a question?
Yeah, this has come up in the past, just with regard to the voting, the voter guides and stuff, where we send out the questions to the candidates respond. The answer that they give on a particular question in one of those topics that you just mentioned is just nonsense, or it's like conspiracy garbage. And, obviously, as journalists and publishers and editors, you all have your own policies and approaches to how to deal with that when some politician or candidate asserts some falsehood or bullshit. But what is the Spotlight News approach? What's the NJ Spotlight News approach when you're dealing with something like that, where it's a solicited comment? Do you do the inline fact checks? Do you refuse to publish it depending on the content? Do you require you send it back? Like, what is the standard operating procedure for you all at NJ PBS and NJ Spotlight News? And what advice would you give to some of the, especially some of the smaller or independent and hyperlocal outlets who may not have either the relationship or the institutional legitimacy to sort of feel like they're empowered to push back or navigate that? How would you all approach that? And again, ignore that if this is outside the scope of what we're talking about, but I've seen that come up a few times.
Yeah, I'm curious, Hannah, if you want to. I mean, you deal with folks on this. I have some thoughts, but Hannah, what do you think?
when I'm writing like I guess it would probably be different if you're writing a reported story versus if you're running like
Right.
verbatim their question and answer. And what I have experience with is when I'm writing reported stories, and normally in those cases, if there are saying something that's conspiracy, and for whatever reason, I think
Yeah.
it's warranted to include that in the story, to show the readers what these candidates think, then I would include the conspiracy aspect, but I would also include like, hey, this is what's really happening. So, for example, one instance where I see this come up is with people who say they're in support of parental rights or parents' rights. And so I like to, when someone says that, I ask them, what do you mean by parental rights? Whose rights? Which parents? Those sorts of questions to toy at, like, what are they really saying when they say they support parental rights? And
Right.
the kids who are generally being impacted, because a lot of the parental rights policies also are anti-LGBTQ.
Yeah, it's a parent's rights to make a certain section of the student population's lives harder, essentially. And I'm not even, I don't even think it's limited to just like active malicious, nonsense, but like even, and I think, thank you, John, for clarifying, especially with the voter guide kind of style thing, where, you know, does it make sense, or how do you do that calculus when it comes to, like you had said, Hannah, is there a news value in printing and showing the voters the absurd statements or the absurdity of a candidate, whether it's conspiracy or malicious or misinformation, or if it's just an uninformed candidate? I mean, you don't have to pass any kind of test to be a candidate. They might just be dumb. Like, how do you navigate that? And is that something, and I think specifically in this case where the interaction is somewhat limited in the back and forth, because the whole point of doing the voter guide the way that we're doing it is to have it structured identically across different candidates. So yeah, that's where I'm coming from.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it is, you do as best you can fact check. Now if it's somebody's opinion, there's only so much, but you certainly want them to back up what they're claiming, and especially if it's accusatory. You are going to hear a lot of the term parent rights or parental rights. That's become a term now. And at least the assumption, at least in my reporting and Hannah's reporting, is that's generally folks who want to limit a school's rights, and press a parent's rights in terms of LGBTQ issues and sex ed issues. And so and that's an opinion, and certainly I think, as Hannah said, I think it's worth knowing that that's where folks are coming from on things. But if they're making some accusations that something is being taught, or something heinous is being taught, and schools shouldn't be doing that, ask them to prove it. I mean, where do you see this, or is it just somebody who's been spreading a rumor about it? And that, I think, is worth reporting as well. But
Yeah,
it is,
sometimes
it's exciting stuff. There's no doubt going to be a core issue in a lot of your communities.
also, if you ever need to check a board's policies to figure out exactly what's happening in the district, that's also listed on their website. Normally it says board policies and regulations. There's a link that you can click. Oftentimes it's through board docs, because a lot of the districts have the same policy providers. And there you could find out, for example, exactly what their policy on transgender students is, if they have them, because sometimes candidates or even board members will talk about doing things that they don't really have the power to do. So it helps to go through those policies and figure out, hey, this is exactly what's happening now, and this is what they're proposing would be different, and if that's even allowed under state law, like New Jersey law against discrimination, which offers protections for those students.
And last piece on this is we also, and I don't know, Hannah, if you can put that link to the scores in the chat. But districts, you're going to have candidates who are talking about how well the schools are doing, or how poorly they're doing, or somewhere in between. We have, and Hannah will post it, the quote unquote state test scores for every school. That is broken down by school and even by grade. And it's in language arts and math. And it will give you a sense. It gives you a sense of how a school does or a district does against its peers, against state averages and the like. Again, it's a limited picture, it's a snapshot, and it's been a bit skewed because of the pandemic, where a lot of districts had seen some decline in especially their literacy scores. Don't overstate their importance. Again, it's really just a test score. But it is a gauge, and it's a gauge that every district in the state follows, and it's a worthy piece of data that you should, if you can, use in your reporting as well.
And the final issue we wanted to highlight was personnel and teachers. Go ahead, Kimmy.
Okay, so I'm thinking of the recent trend, I guess the 15-year-old trend, that school board members who don't have children in public schools but have them in private schools, or are members of a community where that's true of a lot of the parents in their community, they get elected to school boards, specifically to blow up public education from the inside out. Lakewood is an example of this. So, like, where are those issues that they sometimes focus on regarding school vouchers and busing, paying for buses to remote schools outside of the community? Are any of those issues on the table in certain communities this year?
Well, Lakewood is always on the table, and not necessarily resolved ever, and that's a pretty unique situation, even nationally. It certainly is to New Jersey. You don't. I mean, there's certainly in some larger districts, some districts that have struggled over the years. Our city districts, the Newarks and the like, have had some debates internally around school vouchers that you're referring to. I don't often see it on the ballot as an issue with candidates, but there's certainly going to be those who are going to be very critical, and they're getting on the board to, as you say, at least to try to blow up some parts of school districts that they don't like. And that's where the reporter in you has, sort of scope them out. What is their intentions? A lot of them will say it outright, and you can pursue that and get some different perspectives on it. But a lot of also are going to be more subtle about it, and not put up a big fight just to get on the board first, and then once on the board they can do it. So yes, you see it in a few select districts. I've seen it in a few select districts. It's come up in even my hometown of Montclair, where you have some board members who are trying to be a bit more aggressive than others. I don't see it as a dominant issue often, but in any given year, these things do rise to the fore. So it's certainly something to look out for, especially in these times when things are so polarized, and you are going to have candidates who are really looking to disrupt things.
Okay, great. Those are great tips. Thank you.
Yeah, and just as context, there was a school voucher bill that was introduced by some key education lawmakers down in Trenton during this last session, but after a lot of pushback from constituents and from advocates, they ended up pulling the bill. So that's not under consideration anymore at the state level. And so
Thank you.
Yeah. On personnel and teachers, like we said, superintendent selection, if that's something a board is going to be considering anytime soon, that's one of their biggest responsibilities because that's the leader of their district. The board hires and oversees and evaluates the superintendent, and then the superintendent is in charge of the rest of the employees in a district. So that's obviously going to be a big decision and something to ask about if there's a search going on. The board also oversees teacher relations to an extent, teacher contracts, relationships with the teachers union, and there are a lot of school board members who are teachers and are members of the teachers union, which is also probably something worth noting if you're writing about them, if they happen to be a teacher in another district. That informs you a little bit about who they are and where they're coming from. And we're also dealing with a shortage, not just of teachers, but of key school staffs like bus drivers and other roles right now. So some districts are having a hard time hiring. They are trying to turn to remote learning, which needs to be approved by the school board if they're hiring a remote learning company to come in and provide some of that instruction. So how they're filling the shortage and finding bus drivers, that's also something that's important for school board members to be paying attention to.
Yeah, and I don't want to understate the role that the NJA has in influencing these. As Hannah said, a lot of school board members are educators, not in that district typically, but in another district, or they have family who are educators in another district, and you know they're pretty well organized. NJA as a statewide organization in you know putting its manpower and people power to work for candidates and slates that they support. And you know, Hannah mentioned that voucher bill in Trenton. That was a bill that NJA made basically dead on arrival. And they play a role in local races as well. And it's worth sort of scoping out to how that happens. If you know, if a teacher in a given district gets elected to that board, be aware that they have to recuse themselves from any contract discussions or the like. They can't be acting on measures that would influence their own finances. But that's, you know, typically, you know, teachers don't necessarily live in the community that they teach, so that they get away from that. And then another role that you don't see because a lot of it happens behind closed doors is school boards are also acting on tenure cases that are contested, or disciplinary cases involving teachers. So there's a lot of things where the school board does play a role in some of these relations with staff that are very important. And you should get a sense from candidates whether, you know, they're going to be more, you know, taking on the union per se or not. You know, those are all issues that are going to be playing out, if not overtly, covertly in these elections as well.
Rebecca, do you want to jump in?
Yes, I'm sorry I was late to the game. I wanted to know if you guys had discussed, you know, in the realm of you know, elections, the cell phone usage. I know it's become such a huge thing. So if you did already, I'm sorry, but it's a thing. And
It is definitely a thing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Hannah, repeat what you said. I mean, it certainly is an issue that I think is playing out in a lot of places.
My husband's retired New York City teacher, and I'm a longtime journalist, and he has been in Newark for 3 years. So he hates cell phone usage as a teacher. You know, but I'm wondering if it's how it's come up, and I think in the next year it's going to be gigantic. There's going to be some big things, and couple that with some of the school violence that has occurred, parents wanting to be in touch with their children. So all that in play.
Mhm. So since school boards are tasked with setting policies, if they are going to
It's
update
a
or
big
change
deal.
a cell phone policy, that would be up to the board. So that might be like have your cell phone off, and that could off and away. That could be the full policy. Or if they
I
are,
think it's an election issue because there are going to be board members who are going to have certain feelings about it.
Mhm.
And I think that's kind of a big deal. There's not a district in a cover 5 that are not thinking and talking about it right now. And it's all kinds of, it's everywhere.
Mhm.
So in where should it be? Have them, not have them. Distraction, not a distraction. You know, teachers hate it, administrators hate it, you
Mhm.
know, the whole thing. So I'm just wondering maybe where any of you stand and what John thinks about it.
Yeah, I think you should ask candidates, you know, where do they stand? I think it could be one of those pivotal issues. I mean, I've heard talk of this, you know, for a long time, and it's always been pushed back. Parents want to be in touch with their kids. It seems in the last year, even, if not even less, that it has picked up steam in ways that I've never seen it before. as an idea. And I think that there are probably some candidates out there who would make it a core issue for them, for or against. So I definitely.
John, even to push that forward to say, where do you guys stand as a candidate, right?
Right.
Like, what's your feeling about it?
Yep. I
I
think it's
think that
a
push-
good story. Yeah.
Mhm.
Very good story. We want to bounce to some tips, and Hannah, you still there? There you are.
Yes. So these are just like a quick list of tips. Explain why the voters should care, and not just students, parents, teachers, but this is also important to taxpayers and anyone who lives in the town, because a lot of their money is going towards the schools. So they'll probably care about how it's being spent, and determining the budget is an important aspect of the school board member's role. Explaining the role of school boards, especially when it comes to the budget and some of the things that we've gone over today. Try to talk to as many candidates as you can. If it's following up on something based on the survey, or doing a sit-down interview with them after the survey, that's always helpful. And especially to go beyond the slogan. John was talking about how candidates can bracket together under a slogan like "Stop raising taxes" or "Protect our children," "Politics out of the classroom." Little pithy 3-word slogans like that, and you don't really know what they mean or what the candidates stand for until you ask them about it and talk to them. I remember last year on election day, I was speaking to some voters outside of a polling place in Roxbury, and I would ask like what they care about and who they're planning to vote for, and or who they voted for, and what they told me their values were didn't align with the slate that they voted for, because the slogans can be so confusing and misleading in a sense. So it's important to make sure voters are informed and know what the slogan means, know what candidates stand for on the issues. It could be helpful to visit a school if you have that opportunity in the school district, see where things are going, how things are going. You might get some ideas. For example, seeing how cell phones are treated in the school. That might be a jumping off point or a way to add some color to a story about that. Thinking about what you see in the hallway, what you see in a classroom, if there's like one of those phone hangers, or if people have the magnetic locking pouches, there could be something there. Finding out what questions your readers and voters have. Maybe it's people who are getting involved at a school board meeting, if you attend one of those before the election. Maybe it's people in a coffee shop. What do they want to know about the candidates? If you need to find out information about who's running in the areas that you cover, reach out to the county clerk. They will have a list. And if you want to know how much money is being spent on school board races, which isn't normally a lot, but you never know what's going to happen. They've been getting more heated and more contested recently. You could go to ELEC, and there's a link coming later for a database where you could search any money contributions for school board candidates. And one last thing is to watch for endorsements, because that can give you an idea of where candidates lie as well, who they're willing to accept an endorsement for or group themselves with. New Jersey Project and Moms for Liberty, they're pretty right-wing conservative groups that align with the parental rights ideology. They're planning to put out endorsements in counties where they are active. And then the New Jersey Public Education Coalition, they're very pro-public education and more left-leaning, although they're technically nonpartisan. They're going to have a list of like-minded candidates as well, which isn't a direct endorsement, but they're trying to guide their members. Hey, this is who we think is pro-public education and you should vote for. So those will probably be rolling out maybe starting next month from different groups on their websites and their Facebook groups, which is a good way to get that information.
Yeah, I would add, and I'm assuming most of you do so already, but certainly visit a school board meeting to see, some of the board members are going to be incumbents in that election, so you can see them in action. Typically, you may see, as in the public comment period, you're going to see some candidates who are standing up and making a pitch. They're supposed to be, non-political, these things, but it really all depends on how strict the board secretary is going to be. But it's really interesting. I'd love to go back to a school board school board meeting and cover it, knowing what I know now. There's just a lot of issues are playing out and worth diving deeper into. And on the ELEC and the candidate info, a little money goes a long way in a school board race. It's enough money to print up signs, to maybe do some voter assistance in senior centers, situations. It doesn't take hundreds of thousands of dollars. Typically, it's going to be a few $1,000s. So it's worth knowing where that money's coming from. And whether it would be coming from, a Moms for Liberty or the NJEA type of thing. So that's worth knowing as well. And then on the question of finding out questions that readers and voters have, on your site, put something, put a box and say, what are your questions for school board members? And see what you get. You won't get a ton, or you might. And I think that those are really useful, and they give you some power to then go to a candidate and say, hey, my readers want to know what you think about this. It's not just me. So those are, all different things that you can do to engage your readers, engage your community. It's not unusual for a candidate not to answer your questions, and you should report that as well. Some will totally ghost you, and you should certainly report that as well. If they're not going to be answering the local papers' queries on issues, that the voters should know that as well. And we run into that as certainly as a statewide site, including from some of our senators and the like. They figure that they can skip over the press, but our job is to hold them accountable, and so give them a fair chance to answer them. I mean, don't the next day say that they didn't answer my call yesterday. But if they're repeatedly not answering your questions or answering your entreaties, then I think the voters should know that.
And for people who don't answer, or people that do, you might be able to find out information if they have a website, or more likely a Facebook or Instagram page is a lot of how the campaigning is being done now. And also, if they're incumbents, you can look through past board meeting minutes and see how they voted on issues.
And one thing I found interesting too is what donations they make to, like, races and other candidates and stuff like that.
Yeah, there's a ton of data that's available. It's working your way through it, and following up. Somebody's may claim that so and so is getting money from so and so, and that's a situation where you can fact check it. And then often when you're going and looking for that, you find some other things as well. But it is, the stakes are higher. For sure, than they have been, at least in my recent memory, and they're going to continue to be. And with the presidential race, really, bringing a lot of folks to the polls, you're going to get people voting on school boards that hadn't been in the past. But now it's at the bottom of the ballot, and they'll have that opportunity to. Now, what also happens frequently is they'll vote at the top of the ballot, and maybe their congressional and at best a state seat, though we don't have any in this year, and then they'll leave blank the school board. So that we're not necessarily going to get all those Kamala Harris and Donald Trump voters necessarily voting on school board races, but there's going to be more opportunity for it than ever. And certainly as the nation goes, you're going to see some of that play out in how the local community goes as well.
And we'll send this slideshow out to all of you, so you have all of the links included throughout. One more resource we wanted to highlight is the School Board Notes newsletter from the New Jersey School Boards Association. They send it out weekly, and it has good updates. For example, if there's going to be a ballot referendum at the election, things for school board candidates to know and school board members to know. If you want to get on the email list, you can reach out to their communications person, Janet, and this is the email here. There's a link to ELEC, and then your county clerk will have candidate lists.
But when we circulate, we'll include also a bunch of links for test scores and some of the finances and that hopefully you'll find helpful as well. And as I said, go to the next slide. If you have any questions, or if you want to bounce a story off of us, or anything at all, both Hannah and I are more than happy to engage with you and talk about it at any time. Won't necessarily be able to get back to you right away, but feel free. We're really here to help, and we really, it's important for us as a news organization to have you all doing this work. I mean, we can't cover every town by any stretch, and we barely can get into a handful of towns because as a statewide news site. So it's really incumbent on you all to holding these candidates accountable, and holding your schools accountable and your communities. So thank you for all the work you do, and we're really here to help you in any way we can.